The center of our sun is a black hole. Do some of my presentation now, but that's okay. You did really good at moving forward in your conclusion, and that's exactly what I concluded to. And this is one of the reasons I got kicked out of physics conference, is that I didn't just tell them the center of all galaxies were black hole. I told them all suns, including our sun, is a black hole, including planets, atoms. Everything we look at. The energy level of planets, for instance, all the gaseous planet in our solar system, all produce between 70 and 80% more energy than it receives from the sun. There is nothing in current physics that explains why. There's got to be an internal and energy producing dynamic that generates that, and I believe that's a black hole. Inside all orbiting bodies, you find the event horizon of a black hole, and depending if you're far enough from that event horizon, then you're far enough from the high gravitational field so that it is like the surface of this planet, a weak gravitation. Do you guys understand?
So, if that was the case, then would there actually be a solid core inside the crust, or would the crust be hollow? It would be like a sphere with a hollow inner with the black hole in the center. So
that's right.
Hollow Earth theory.
Hollow Earth, hollow sun, hollow galaxy, which we see, hollow atoms. We see that the atom is 99.9% space, and so on. Go ahead.
Do you think that this picture up here is also reproduced by the Big Bang itself?
Yeah, you could see. You see, if this cycle of a black hole gathering too much plasma and then spinning it out can be applied at all resolution of the fractal,
all the way back.
Then you could say that the Big Bang is just an enormous black hole that gathered too much material and eventually spit it out, and that created our universe. Do you see what I'm saying? And you can see it at all levels. You can see it in the creation of solar systems. You can see it even in the creation of atoms and so on. You know, at electron clouds orbitals jump from one quanta to the other if you add enough energy.
Well, then maybe you could use this pattern to predict the distribution of matter out there in the universe.
You can, and that's why we wrote the scaling law. That's the start of predicting the pattern of distribution of matter. First of all, you describe its scale.
It circles throughout space.
Yes, you should see these circles throughout space. Yeah, that's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, all in this form.
Yeah, you will find. So the universe would have this form. Now, this form is not a 2D form. It's actually a 3D double torus, and we're going to see what that looks like in a minute.
Well, if you said people are black holes too, then why don't people gather too much material and then spit it out?
We do.
We do.
Was that like shedding your skin cells?
Yeah, the cell division is occurring at 1 million cells a second, I think. Okay, and you're shedding stuff all the time in order for your system to stay in balance. There's all sorts of ways you can look at it. For instance, throughout the day you radiate energy all the way throughout the day, and then as you radiate energy, you gather information,
And you gather food.
and you gather food and so on and all this stuff. Go ahead.
If the Earth would be hollow, would it have a nucleus in the middle?
The nucleus is singularity. The nucleus is from the event horizon of a black hole, from the surface of a black hole, everything inside there is collapsed towards singularity, leaving vacuum behind. So the center of the Earth would be a singularity. So would be the center of the solar system. the sun.
What you're saying is that singularity is basically infinite. You're
Yes.
infinitely moving towards a singular point that never really fully...
You never reach, because it has infinite potential of division. So, remember I was saying we all observe things from a different angle, so we're all different? But we all agree that this is a pan in general, Depending on what you've taken for breakfast, you might think it's a pink elephant, but that's a whole other story. But in general, we all agree that this is a pan. Why? Well, because although all of our heads, we're standing on a sphere, right? We're all standing on a sphere. And although all of our heads are diverging, right, to infinity, all of our feet are converging to the same singularity that links us all. So as far as the earth goes, from its point of observation, we are all agreeing on a consensus reality, which is constantly changing as a result of the way we're changing our relationship to reality on the surface. You guys see how that works? No?
No.
Oh my God. Okay. Let me clarify that. Although we all have an individual way of observing the universe because we are all our own singularity. And when I say that, I don't say it trivially. If you are the singularity centering a universe, I mean it literally. If the universe is infinite, there is a universe out there that you are the perfect center of. Okay? So I'm not just making an allegory here. You are the center of the universe, but and then that universe that you're the center of, that is the center of even a larger one, and so on and so on. Well, okay, so now you observe the universe from your own center, but although you observe it from your own center, we are all connected to the same gravitational center, the center of the earth. The same singularity holds us all together. And that allows us to have a common agreement on the planet that this is a felt pen. Do you see? And not a pink elephant. Right? Otherwise, all of our views would diverge so far apart, we wouldn't agree on anything. You see? But the system is so that there is always a larger center that generates a consensus of observation between all the independent systems of that organization. For instance, all of your cells agree to be you, right? Because they're all held by a specific singularity gravitational center, which is you, right? And they all collaborate to generate you. Is that clearer now? Mm-hmm. There was a bunch of hands up. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to know that since you said atom is 99.99999 space,
yeah.
And if you say Earth is so it's a black hole of atom, does that mean that Earth can have that much space in it?
Well, it does, because Earth is made out of atoms, and all the atoms are mostly space.
No,
but
in terms of the hollow Earth.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that the hollow Earth it has that much space. If there's a black hole at the center of the Earth, which I believe there is, it's fairly small, because it wouldn't take a very large black hole to generate the energy that we observe on Earth. Go ahead.
Could you describe the order of magnitude size of the event horizon of that black hole?
Of the black hole of the Earth?
Yeah, the range, perhaps, the limits?
Yeah, it would be in diameter. It would be very very short. It would be, the size of a ball that big. It wouldn't be that big. Yeah.
on the order of half a meter less to down to something like 0.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's not all done, that part, because we haven't made these calculations. We've made them for the sun and we've made them for other things, but we haven't made it for the Earth yet. But the theory would predict that there is a black hole at the center of the Earth, and that we're orbiting that black hole, but we're orbiting that black hole so far from it that we're in a place where there's weak gravitation, and we're far enough from the surface of the event horizon that the plasma had time to cool off, you see, that far from the event horizon, and it became more solid, you know, and that's why we have a crust around the black hole.
Is that plasma that you're relating to similar to what I read of Hawking radiation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hawking radiation is the radiation on the surface of a black hole, but the Hawking radiation is really weak. The thing is that they're not calculating the plasma dynamics that are going along with the Hawking radiation, meaning all the plasma, you know, being so close to a large gravitational field and all the thermodynamics effects and all the charge effects creates all this radioactivity, all this electromagnetic activity, and all the radiation we see coming out of black holes. Go ahead in the back.
The previous computer frame looked at a glimpse. To me, my first impression was, or one of the impressions I had was, of magnetic flux lines around the Earth. And I'm sure that's no accident.
That's right. You're talking about the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect is very similar to this, and we'll see that in a minute. So you're right.
And that's the same that plays out in both magnetic and electronic flux lines.
Yes.
Wherever, however the magnitude, wherever.
Yeah, at any scale, you find the same dynamics of the double torus and the structure of the vector equilibrium at singularity at all levels of the scale. So you'd expect the same dynamics to appear, and that's what we see. From from electron cloud, probability clouds, to the clouds of a supernova, you know, up in the sky. So, you know, that's a span of a very large scale.
In that one, it almost looked one-dimensional, like it was a flat picture.
Yeah, but it's not.
In fact, it's completely full?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so after I saw all this, and I was like all excited about the dynamics that we were being able to picture, it was nice to see this guy show up and in this conference and tell us exactly what it is about. Yeah.
Is the result of a star that exploded in our own galaxy in the year 1054 AD. And as we watch these things explode and get bigger and bigger, they're beautiful to look at. By the way, the one event on Cosmos in 1987 has evolved into a very interesting looking expanding remnant. If you look just at where the exploding star used to be now with Hubble Space Telescope, you see this rather strange looking structure. If you zoom in with Hubble Space Telescope and look at the remains of 1987 supernova, here's what you see. And I'd like you to slide again, please. That was better. Thank you. Okay, now what is this? I mean, it looks like sort of nested hula hoops. I mean, how did it possibly get that way? And there's a solid astrophysical answer for that. It's just two words, and it's nobody knows. There's no way anyone would have predicted a structure like this if it hadn't been observed by Hubble Space Telescope. So these remnants are very exotic things, but what they share in common.
Well, you know, he didn't know about my work, obviously, because I did predict it. And so, is this the right thing? I think so. So I thought that was interesting, you know. It was like, oh yeah, well, you know, I did talk about that, but one of the problems here is that the images are showing, like you were saying, a 2D type of structure, when actually we're talking about a spherical structure. Let me see. the dynamic of that spherical structure are the dynamic of a double torus that looks like this. See, if I took this double torus and I took a picture of it at the right angle, it would look like two spheres intersecting as well. These are the dynamics of the standing waves of the surface of the black hole, of the double torus, predicted by this theory. And here you can see the expansion and contracting side of the universe dynamics. And this is the path of a test particle on the surface of such a black hole. This is the dynamics of the Coriolis effect. On the Earth, you find the same Coriolis effect. For instance, the weather has, the patterns of the weather goes down to the equator, gets hotter, and then goes back up to the North Pole and back down towards the equator, and so on. And the one from the South Pole goes from the South Pole to the equator and back down, creating this exact dynamic. And I thought it was interesting, although I didn't mention it at the APS, that the view of these dynamics from above is a yin and a yang. Yang. And yin yang. I'm sorry. And and we'll see in a minute why that's so crucial. But these dynamics are found at all levels. This is the paper I'm publishing now. And you can see that these dynamics are found at all levels of stars and galaxies and blazars. This is a galactic disk, have 3,000 light years vortices that emerge from the black hole at the middle. Okay? And they have huge galactic halos all around it. Can everybody see this? All around it here. And the stars move out from the galactic arm into the galactic halo and then back down and then back out. Go ahead.
What are you saying, the obvious, to say that the double Taurian Coriolis effect, that we can imagine that our bodies have that same type of energy pattern around us?
Yeah, you would, and that's why I think that the Buddhist shows a vortex entering at the crown chakra and entering at the root of the spine and then meeting in the heart center, reproducing that very dynamic. And when you look at the heart center of the Buddha where the vortex meet, there you find the geometry of the Star of David, or the geometry of the double star tetrahedron, the geometry of the vacuum, the singularity. So it's present in many different traditions, and actually I did develop a meditation technique based on this to improve and to increase your capacity to move the information through from the vacuum into your singularity. There is a physical place inside your heart that has a singularity. Your heart has a little cavity between the two ventricula of the heart, and that little cavity has the highest electromagnetic field of your body. It can be measured up to 8 feet away from you. And that's the battery of life that keeps your heart going. When you die, that singularity is no longer present, and I think that's one of the reasons that they're missing a bunch of weight that they can't account for that disappear when people die. The weight is the result of that singularity curving space-time, creating a gravitational effect that we call weight. Go ahead.
You said you developed unification technique around that. Do you have that on a tape or a CD that you're selling?
No, not yet.
Could you do that, please?
I will. I've been asked to do that for a long time. I will do it as soon as I'm finished publishing the physics papers, because that has to be there first so that I'm not discredited. You got to be careful in this world. Although I'm already way out on the edge. But, I'm trying to minimize the damage. If you look at it, and that's soon because I'm publishing in November.
In what book?
It's in Temple University Press. It's a peer-reviewed journal. And it's just the first publishing, which is an overview. And the overview then will have sections that are published in other journals, probably PhysRev and math journals for the solutions we found to Einstein field equations. But here's a quasar with the same dynamical vortices going towards singularity. Now, these vortices are 10 to the 6 light years. That's 1,000,000 light years long vortex. 1,000,000 at the speed of light, right? It would take you 1,000,000 years to get to the end of that vortex. Okay, and that's only half. Okay, and that vortex is spinning at near the speed of light. Those vortexes are thought to be relativistic vortex. They spin at near the speed of light. Can you imagine the dynamics that it would take? Can you imagine the torque that generates? And they haven't calculated the torque? It's like, wait a minute. No wonder you're missing energy. Go ahead.
Do we have any idea of the proportion of how much that torque could be relative to the whole mass energy of that, shall we say?
We're in the middle of making these calculations. It's not obvious because we have to add a torque and a Coriolis effect function to the space-time manifold. And torque is written in vectors and space-time manifolds are written in tensors. So we got to convert and all this, so it's a big job, but we're in the middle of doing that and it's looking extremely promising. It's very, very good. And so we'll be able to give answers to that soon. But here, look at the fractal. This is a quasar, 1,000,000 light year vortex. Here is a microquasar. Those are found inside galaxies. And those are 3 light years long vortexes. But the exact same dynamics. Quasars, microquasars, and clustars. All different scales, all same dynamics. You can see these dynamics at all levels. Here's pulsars. Here's again, same dynamic that you see. This is actually a picture of these vortices going towards the center of the pulsar. And then when you took a picture of the center of the pulsar, you can see the petals emerge of the octahedron in the middle of the octahedron. Look at these twistors. These are the top and the bottom of the pulsars. And like I said, the same dynamics are found on the surface of the Earth. And actually, the same dynamics are found on the surface of the Sun, on the surface of Jupiter, and so on. So the final geometry is something like this. A double vortex, a double torus, right, which generates an equatorial plane of gravitational waves. And at the singularity, the 12 vertices of the vector equilibrium fractal structure, which determine the scale of the topology of space-time. Now, we wrote all the math for this, and they work. When you write the math in group theory for these dynamics, you end up with all subatomic particles and all forces being accounted for. So you know, when you start to see things like this, you start to think, wait a minute, how come these people knew about this? This is an ancient symbol that was found on a granite pillar in Abydos, Egypt, in a temple called the Osirian Temple. Why is it that this object, this drawing, which is on the 100-ton pink pillar in the middle of that temple, is not in any picture books or history books anywhere or archaeologic books anywhere? It took me 10 years of research to go through all the books that were written on the Osirian Temple, from the first papers that were published from the archaeologists that found the temple to eventually, all the papers and the books that were written. None of them had this picture in it. The way I got this picture is that a friend of mine went out there and took it. Okay? Why is it that this picture is not in there? I'll tell you why. Because this graphic is not carved into the rock. It's not etched into the rock. This graphic is actually burnt, laser burnt, into the atomic structure of that pillar. Now when you think of ancient civilization 5,000 years ago, you don't expect them to be doing laser burn on, hard surfaces at high levels of accuracy. Okay? Archaeologists have a really hard time explaining these things. When they can explain something, usually the tendency is not to popularize it. So they leave it out. Some of these symbols that are in the Osirian temple, there's no writing in all of that temple. Not one piece of writing. All there is these things. There's a few of them. Some of them are chipped. Well, the laser burn is through the rock. So that actually, even if you chip it, it still appears on the rock. We have no current technology to reproduce this. That's why you don't find this in history books. The other thing is that the Osirian temple is 50 feet below all the other temples at Abydos. The archaeologists tried to say, the Egyptians dug 50 feet and then started building. Well, the Egyptians never did that to any other building. And actually, when the geologists went there, they went, no, that's not the case. The building was there and sedimentation piled up beside it. Well, when they calculate how long it would take to get 50 feet of sedimentation, that temple is no longer 4,000 to 5,000 years old. That temple is 9,000 to 12,000 years old. Maybe 10,000 years old. That's why archaeologists really don't like that temple. In fact, they very rarely discuss it. Well, it just happens that if you take that symbol and you make every circle a sphere, then you have exactly the appropriate sphere packing to generate a 64 tetrahedron grid. Hi, Mom. So here it is. Again, it comes out. Interestingly, in that temple, the Egyptians said was the foundation temple of their belief system, where Isis revived Osiris. You know, the myth that started the whole Egyptian mummification and so on was Isis and Osiris. Well, Osiris' brother was jealous, and he killed him and cut him in pieces. And Isis, in short, and Isis, found all the pieces and brought them back to the Osirian temple and bandaged the pieces back together, creating the first mummy. And then it says, the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead says that she, with her magic, put life back in Osiris' body. Well, if she was able to do that, she most likely did it with what information was on these walls. The information that is on these walls might be a hint to how she was able to do this. And it became clear to me that it must have something to do with them knowing about the foundation of the geometry of space. So I was looking at it carefully because you know how I had this kind of illumination on the temple in Mexico? Well, when you start examining other temples around the world, you realize that these other temples have a lot in common. That is, they're all very, very difficult to explain with vine ropes, copper tools, no pulley, and so on. One Egyptologist, the director of the Giza Plateau, said, "There is not one grain of evidence of any advanced civilization ever having been in Egypt prior to the Egyptians." And I thought that was one of the most accurate statements I ever heard from an archaeologist. Because if you're looking for grains of evidence of sand, you will miss it. If you got your head in the sand, you will miss it. But if you look up from the sand and stop looking for grains of evidence, you will see millions of tons of rocks right in front of your eyes, giving you some pretty damn good evidence. Okay? The Grand Pyramid of Giza is made of 2,300,000 stones. 2,300,000 stones. It stands at 481 feet of altitude. Its base is 13 square feet. 13 square acres. 13 square acres. That is extremely large. When you take survey picture, satellite picture of the apex of the Grand Pyramid at Giza, it is 1/4 of an inch off the center of the base. That's 13 square acres. 13 acres square. 1/4 of an inch off center. That's after placing 2,300,000 stones that you have cut with copper tools. Yeah, you need some pretty good moonshine to do that one. But I guarantee you, that is extremely difficult to reproduce. In fact, there is no way engineering companies on this planet could ever reproduce that. Even with all of our modern technology, if we give them billions and billions of dollars, they couldn't come up with anything like that. Because if you divide a quarter of an inch error by 2,300,000 stones, the accuracy at which you're placing these stones is outrageous. And we can't do anything like that. Our most accurate buildings, like telescopes, are not that accurate. They're not even close to having that kind of accuracy. Go ahead.
So you could say we've just barely come out of the Dark Ages.
Basically, or we got into the Dark Ages. Because it seems that there was people that were doing a heck of a lot better than us. Sorry. So when I was looking at this, I'm like, wait a minute. That doesn't happen that way. Why is it that we think, that this is taught as facts to children in schools every day? That the pyramids were built by people pulling on vine ropes? And you know why? Because in the 1800s, a bunch of English archaeologists showed up in Egypt, and that's the only thing they could come up with. And because they had PhDs and they were very respected archaeologists, since then, everybody is repeating the same thing. And somehow, a theory that's completely unproven became a fact. In fact, you will not get a PhD in archaeology if you say anything else about the pyramids. I guarantee you that. You cannot get a PhD in archaeology by saying the pyramids were built by Little Green Man. This is one of the problems with education. A whole bunch of people repeating what they've all been taught doesn't advance the field very rapidly. Because everybody is repeating the same thing. You're not going anywhere. So, but these archaeologists never actually, I know they're not mathematicians, but this is simple mathematics, okay? You take the number of stone, they tell you that the pyramids had to be built in 20 years, okay? So that the dynastic Egypt worked. And then you calculate how fast they had to put the stones in. At 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, 365 days a year, for 20 years, they had to place the stone every 2 minutes to finish the pyramid on time. With that level of accuracy. Never mind. But then the archaeologists say, no, those were farmers. They could only build the pyramids during the time of the flood of the Nile when they couldn't work in the fields. 3 months out of the year. See, when they had that 3 months vacation, hey, let's all go and build a huge pyramid. So they went out there and built pyramids 3 months out of the year. You redo your calculation. Now they have to place a rock every 2 seconds to make it in 20 years. So that really doesn't work. Because it's not like you can take these huge rocks and average 2 tons, some of them up to 40 tons rock. Like in the King's Chamber, there's 100 slabs of 40-ton pink granite rock, okay? These things at 135 feet of elevation in the pyramid. It's not like you go, hey Joe, catch this one. Hey Joe, catch this one. You know? And the other guy on the other end is like putting them in. You can't do that. And it doesn't matter if you got 100,000 people. You still can't do it. And you know, they tell you they did that by rolling the rocks on logs. Well, they might have not noticed, but these pyramids are in the middle of a desert. You need a lot of logs to move 2,300,000 stones. Where did the wood come from? When you ask them that, they say, oh, they imported it from Europe. I see. Was this like some catalog, you know, 1-800 ordering? Because, like, as far as I know, the Egyptian didn't, like, you know, easily navigate it into Europe, cut millions of logs they would have needed, and brought them back. There's no evidence of that. So, but even more fundamental, I'll ask you, you know, even more fundamental, the fundamental axioms of archaeology is that you observe and decode the remains of a civilization to understand its morses and its activities and all this, right? Okay. There is over 1 million hieroglyph walls in Egypt. Thousands and thousands of hieroglyph walls in Egypt. In the temples, in the tombs, everywhere. They tell us how they made love. They tell us how they eat. They tell us how they went to the washroom. They tell us everything about their life. Everything. Not one of those walls mentioned building the pyramids. What? They forgot? You're talking about something that would have taken a huge effort. You'd think they would have put at least a little wall somewhere saying, oh, by the way, we built the pyramid. No. None of that. In fact, the archaeologists say not only that the pyramids built, that the Egyptians built the pyramids, but they say that they built them as tombs. Okay. What's the evidence? Zero. Zilch. Not one pyramid was ever found to host a mummy. Not one mummy was ever found in a pyramid. Not one. And I'm not just talking about Egypt. I'm talking about all around the world. And it's funny because you know how they do all these like historic, you know, History Channel and all this stuff. You know, they have all these nice documentaries, and they show you where they found the pyramids and the, you know, and the tombs and all this, and Tutankhamun and all this, and then they splice and they cut directly into the pyramids. So you think the mummies were found in the pyramids, but in fact the mummies were found. Most of the king's mummies were found in the King's Valley, far from the pyramid. Some of the pyramid, they had to dynamite their way into the pyramid. They couldn't find an entrance. When they got inside the pyramid, there was the sarcophagus, the so-called sarcophagus in the middle. It had a slab. Some of them had slabs that were like 40 tons slabs sealing the sarcophagus. They would unseal it, pull the slab off, still no mummy. What was their conclusions? Grave robbers. Those grave robbers, they were unbelievable. They just walked through the walls because they had to dynamite their way in. So those grave robbers got there before. They must have walked through the walls, got in there, picked up the 40-ton slab on top of the sarcophagus, pulled all the stuff out, including all the bones and everything else, which, wonder what they would do with, and then, closed it back up, resealed it, just to make sure they didn't disturb anything, and then walked back out with all of this stuff. This doesn't make sense. Now, there's other things that don't make sense. There is nowhere on these pyramids that it says, I built this for my tomb, I was born then and I died then. You think if you build such a great monument, at least you put your name on it. That's all logical. Pyramids were not tombs. Pyramids were not built by Egyptians. No Egyptian text talks about the Egyptian building the pyramids. The texts do talk about monuments, enormous monuments being built. And who they say built them was the sun gods. The Mayans, the Incas, the Chinese, the Japanese, all cultures that have these buildings, none of them say we built it. All of them say the sun gods taught us how to build, how to talk, how to write, how to do all this stuff. Go ahead.
I just want to say there's no inscription, no hieroglyphs inside the pyramid as well.
There's no hieroglyphs inside the pyramid. And Lord knows that the Egyptians put hieroglyphs everywhere. So why didn't they not write inside the pyramids? So those are all huge contradiction to the concept that the Egyptians or the Mayans or the Incas or the Chinese or so on built their pyramids. See what I'm saying? But what is it? Like other examples is this puppy. The Sphinx. Most people think that the Sphinx is built. The Sphinx is not built. The Sphinx was carved. The Sphinx was carved right out of the enclosure of the Giza Plateau. Now, when you look at the paws of the Sphinx, you might notice that there's like brick-like structures on it, so it looks like it's built. Those are repairs that were done later in history. But the Sphinx was carved, and actually there's evidence that the head of the Sphinx was recarved. It used to be a lion's head, but it was recarved into a pharaoh's head by one of the pharaohs. However, there is erosion patterns on the Sphinx that is a telltale sign that the Sphinx had to be carved when there was a lot of rain hitting it because of the erosion on it. We know when the last time this area had a lot of rain, and that was approximately 10,000 years ago, which matches the Osirian temple at Abydos. Now, these blocks here consist of the Sphinx temple. They're the blocks that were removed from the side of the Sphinx to carve the Sphinx out. Now, if you were removing blocks from the Sphinx enclosure to build a temple in front with the blocks, would you use 100-pound block, 500-pound block, maybe even 1,000-pound block? Even like 3 or 4 tons pound blocks. That would start becoming a problem with our current technology, especially in the sand. And especially if you got to stack them. Okay? But the ancient Egyptian or whoever 10,000 years ago built this didn't remove 100-pound block. They removed 200 tons block. And we know that they were removed from the enclosure because the stratification of the layers of rock matches where they were removed from, and you can actually tell which rock came from exactly where in the enclosure. 200 tons. See, this is a little person here. See what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not trivial. You don't just grab a 200-ton block with your buddies and move it over there. The current we actually at this time lift about 200 tons with the largest land crane on earth. And we move it only from a truck bed into a boat. We can't roll with it. We can't go and move it around the sand, and certainly we can't stack them on top of each other to make a temple. 10,000 years ago, somebody was moving 200-ton block with ease. I think this is fantastic. You know, because this is about our true history. This is about what happened on this planet prior to our current history, prior to our current thinking. Look at this statue. Ramses II. When they found this statue, it was laying like this, it had fallen over in the desert. It's made out of pink granite. It's perfectly polished with copper tools. And this is a person beside it. The statue itself, when they found it, they said, "Oh, let's just move it over there because we're going to build the Ramses Museum." So the engineers came and they said, "Well, okay, but then we'll have to cut it in pieces because this thing is approximately 1,000-ton solid block of granite. 1,000 ton. That is 5 times more than what we can lift today with a land crane." So instead they build a museum around it. Which this is not the only 1,000-ton block that was found. The pillars on each side of the entrance of temples in Egypt, they are called obelisks. Many of them were in excess of 1,000 tons. And they all come out, all these large objects come out of a quarry that we know where it is. It's hundreds of miles up the Nile. And the quarry is on the other side of the Nile over a mountain range. Okay? When you ask archaeologists, how did this get there? They say, they cut the trench from the Nile across the mountain range into the quarry. And then they let the water in, and then they picked up the object, they stuck it on a barge, and they floated it down the Nile. But there's no evidence of that trench ever being cut. How do you lift up a 1,000-ton object and put it on a barge without sinking it? I mean, that is just not appropriate. It just doesn't happen. So when you look at this, you start to wonder, who were these sun gods? And were they able to go all around the world? Under the water in Japan, recently, pyramids were found. These pyramids are at 19.47 latitude. They're enormous pyramids. All the fishermen knew that they were there, but they didn't think it was important, so they didn't tell anybody. And here is another picture of these slabs. They're huge. They're huge blocks. What's really interesting about those is that, you see, you can't date a pyramid. You can't date a monument, because carbon dating only carbon dates. You need carbon. Rock doesn't have much carbon in it, not enough to date it. It has silica, and it has, it has a certain rate of decay and all this. You can date how old is the rock, but that won't tell you when it was cut and assembled into a pyramid. Okay? So actually, archaeologists don't date the monuments. They just find the bones of this poor fellow beside it, or they find a fireplace beside it or something, and then they carbon date that. And they say, oh, it's this dude that built this thing. You see? But when the pyramid goes under the water, now coral growth starts to happen shortly after. And that's carbon datable. So now you can tell at least when the pyramid went under the water. Well, when they carbon dated these pyramids, they went under the water at least 10,000 years ago. The meltdown of the last ice age, when the water rose and covered the earth. There is over 500 flood stories in ancient civilization all around the world, talking about an advanced civilization that was there prior the sun gods, and the flooding that occurred that destroyed morals of that civilization. Here we might be seeing some of the vestiges of that civilization. Go ahead.
Well, Edgar Casey came up with
by finding a wall or a road. And we did, and he said it was going to be in the early 70s, and in 1973, I believe, divers off the coast of Bimini found huge rocks under the water, making a road. And Edgar Casey said we were going to find a chamber under the paws of the Sphinx. And recently, using
Side-looking radar?
yeah, I'm sorry. Well,
Side-looking radar?
Yeah, it's actually seismic reverberation waveform. They were able to look under the paws of the Sphinx, and they found a chamber there, and they say they haven't got into it yet. That's a whole other story. But anyway, these pyramids were found in Egypt. And these ones are datable to 10,000 years. Check out this picture. This was taken during the Second World War by an American pilot that was lost over China. And he saw this pyramid, and he took a picture, and he brought it back home. He survived the whole thing and brought the picture back home. And everybody, you know, a few years ago when I would present that, people would say, oh, well, that one is iffy, you know. This could be a hoax. Well, okay, nobody believed him. Except that the Chinese government in the last few years have released these pictures. Not only is there more, there's pyramids in Egypt, there's hundreds of pyramids in Egypt, in China. And the Chinese government actually got the farmers to farm on top of the pyramids so that they wouldn't be so apparent by satellite. And the reason why, so here's the poor farmer that got the job. The reason why they were doing that is because they didn't want the Western world to know about these pyramids. Why? Because the legends that comes with these pyramids is that the sun gods built them, and that the sun gods were blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. As far as the Chinese government looked at this, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people had to be Europeans. And the last thing they wanted was European people being responsible for some of the most ancient knowledge of the Chinese tradition. So they didn't want those pyramids to be known by the West. They did find the mummies of these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in the high desert of China. Over 500 mummies were found. All very tall, absolutely not Asian people. And then you go to the forbidden city of China, the city that holds all the knowledge of the universe, all the knowledge of the sun gods. And at the entrance of the city is the Sphinx, the lion, which in both Egypt and Chinese tradition are the guardian of the knowledge. They guard the knowledge under their paws. And when you look closely at the paw, what do you find? A spherical intersecting pattern of the flower of life, which generates 64 tetrahedron grid. Guardian of the knowledge. Fairly old, but this section of China was largely rebuilt and fairly recent, you know. But it's all coming from very ancient tradition that's passed on orally throughout the ages. And that's why you find still the knowledge being present. Although the knowledge of the sun gods has been very, very confused and diluted throughout the ages. So when you go further into the Chinese tradition, what do you find? The I Ching. How many I Ching symbol is there? 64. And remember now, the yin and the yang we saw is a double torus. You'd be missing the geometry of the vacuum in the middle of singularity. But the 64 symbols of the I Ching gives you this. How? When I found this, I thought, oh, this is so sweet. It took me weeks, took me months to actually figure it out. I knew there was 64 symbols, but what did the symbols say? The symbols typically are arranged in a circle. The 64 symbols. Can you turn off your light a little bit so maybe you can see the symbols? Maybe not. They're here. There's 64 of them. And each of them are actually composed of full sticks and broken sticks. And each of the symbols are in opposition. So like 1 and 64, 2 and 63, they're all in opposition. And I realized, wait a minute, if you take 6 thick, you put them in 3D space, which geometry would you get?
Tetrahedron.
A tetrahedron. That's the only geometry you can generate out of 6 sticks. But then why the broken sticks? Well, if you're following the code of the I Ching that tells you the sticks are in opposition, then you're going to need broken sticks. Watch this. Boom, 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 boom. You see? You need broken sticks to do the polar opposite of the tetrahedron. They have to be broken because the sticks intersect.
Could you do that again with the light off so you can't see it as well?
Okay.
Yeah, we don't need lights, period.
Well, the video
does.
Boom, boom. Can everybody see this? You need a broken stick to go in between the other sticks to generate the opposite polar structure, which is given by the code itself. Isn't that sweet? And so you take the code, and I didn't have time to do the whole animation. I didn't finish on that. I will when I get better funding. You see, if you keep doing this and you follow the code, you're going to be able to do the whole 64 tetrahedron grid. Actually, after you finish the code of 64 sticks, of 64 code, each one making a tetrahedron, you will have made the 512 grid, which is the next fractal level from 64. So if you actually follow the I Ching code, which is the trigram with 8 first, and then the 64 hexagrams, right? And you generate the 512, then you follow the exact progression. Cool? So, do we have evidence of the sun gods? We do. You know, imagine again that you were to find a little bitty planet in the corner of the galaxy somewhere, and that bitty planet is not very evolved. Like, let's say you show up and they're like still in caves and not very involved. You'd probably want to try to help them along. right? So what would you do? You can't really come to the surface, stop one of the cavemen and start talking to him about physics. It doesn't really work. The caveman's probably going to look at you and try to bunk you on the head. Right? So what would you do? You'd probably give them symbols, right, that have embedded in them very, very important information about the structure of the universe. And you'd expect that as that civilization grow and reach higher and higher levels, they would be able to decode those codes that was given to these ancient people. Especially if you make the code covered with all sorts of religious belief and so on, so that the codes survive all of the ages. To make sure that they understand this is a sacred code and all this stuff, so that they would transfer the information throughout the ages. Well, we have evidence of these sun gods. These are skulls that are found in temples in South America. This was found, this is in the Peruvian Museum. I call it conehead. When the archaeologists found this, they said, oh, this is the result of skull deformation. You know how the ancient tradition, they would bend their head to deform them? Now, they did do that. This is the bust of Nefertiti, for instance. Tutankhamun did have a deformed head. There's many skulls like that. But when you read the ancient texts and they say, they talk about deforming their head, they say that they did that to imitate the sun god, to become sun gods themselves. Now, if you deform your head, right, today, it doesn't matter how much you deform it. You will never be able to exceed the volume capacity of your skull. Your head might look really weird, but the volume inside will be exactly the same. In these cases, the volume of these skulls, the inside volume of these skulls, are over twice the natural volume of the human skull. The normal volume of the human skull. These are not the result of skull deformation. You cannot do that by deforming your skull. The other thing that's interesting is that the hole at the bottom of the skull here, where the atlas goes in, the spine, tells you how big the person was, right? Because you can figure it out from the size of the spine. These people had to be between 12 and 15 feet tall. There was giants on the earth. Many ancient texts talks about the sun gods as being giants. These are very, very big people. And the fact that there's multiple of these skulls found in temples all around South America tells you that it's not the result of some deformation.
Have you got any skeletons to go with them?
No. Not that I know of. There might be, I don't know.
How about carbon dating on the skull?
That'd be a really cool thing to have. And you can see on some of these skulls that they've carved right into the skulls. So you know material was taken out. And most likely the material was tested. But there is no data available whatsoever on the result of those tests.
And if it was tested, would they be able to see if it was also silica, carbon and silica? And
They would definitely be able to see if it was a typical DNA strand of beings that are from this planet or not.
Yeah, one of those that was Nefertiti.
That was the bust. It's a statue of Nefertiti. And this one here. This is a statue of Nefertiti that shows that she had a skull similar.
So is that the writers talking to them about being long heads?
Yes. Yeah.
Are these skulls related to the mummies that were found in China?
No. These skulls were found in South America and Mexico. Here is some of the Mexican skulls. The early ones were South American skulls. This one actually has a larger volume than the cone head. And this one is the largest volume ever found. Mexico. And the facial features are missing, but the skull is intact, and it's enormous. That's the eye sockets, so you can imagine how large that forehead was. And here is each lobe, each hemisphere of the skull of the brain seemed to have developed independently in this case, and making it enormous. Go ahead.
On the prior slide, am I correct in saying that the orbits of the eyes are a good deal larger than normal?
Oh yeah, much larger than normal. This person had huge eyes. And there's all sorts of features on these skulls that are not normal. For instance, in these cases, many of the facial features in the jaws don't belong to an Homo sapien. They're a mix between various species that are not supposed to be mixed together. Here's Tutankhamun. Even Tutankhamun seemed to have a larger than expected skull. Here's his brother as well. Now, there's many instances in the Egyptian and the Mayan and the Inca scripts where they describe that the sun gods, including in the Bible, where they describe that the sun gods actually mixed and had children with women of the human species. And that generated a whole new species, which was half sun gods, half man. So here, these might be evidence of this altered species, of this mix. And you would expect that these people would become pharaohs, because they would have all sorts of capacity that the average man didn't. So here, we're starting to see a whole new picture of the history of human beings. And mingled in that picture is the information that these sun gods tried to give to man, and that we are rediscovering at this time. It became clear to me eventually that the sun gods must have been sun gods for a reason. They were called sun gods in all these civilizations, just the same. Well, if the universe is different scales black holes, then in order for these sun gods to travel through space, from one side of the galaxy to the other, they would have to enter the wormhole, the singularity, at the center of those black holes. So they would use stars as gateways to go from one side of the galaxy to the other. And then you would expect them to be called sun gods. That is why, for instance, the ancient tradition in most of these countries talks about the sun as the doorway to the higher realm where the sun gods come from. They talk about the black hole at the center of our galaxy as the hub, the central sun, from which you can access all of the stars in the galaxy. So you would enter the sun and then through to the galactic center, out one of the arms of the galaxy, out one of the sun, in another arm of the galaxy. This is the sun as it looks normally. On the sun appears sunspots. These are sunspots. Actually, there are sunspots seen at the X-ray range level. So they appear very bright. Actually, sunspots in the optical spectrum are very dark. They're like black. Well, they appear when the sun becomes very active at 19.47 latitude north and south. Okay? And when you look at the sunspot carefully, and I picked this one because I believe that sunspots are at the heart of the matter. When you look at it carefully, you can see that the fire is being sucked in. That's what made me think, actually, from my calculation and from my theory and all this, that the sunspot on the sun are not surface events, but they're huge vortices going to the middle of the sun. The other reason, can you see the fire being sucked in here? I got in a lot of trouble for saying that. Because they said, no, it's just surface event. And I said, well, if it's just surface event, how come if you look at the sunspots on the sun, they always occur in opposite polar. See? This one here got an opposite one there. These three there have an opposite three there. You see? All the sunspot occurs in opposition to each other, because when you have a vortex going one way in the Coriolis effect, you have another one going the other way on the other side. And they generate a link at the middle, a link at singularity. Sunspots are huge vortices going towards singularity at the center of the black hole. And that's why when you look at sunspots very carefully, you see fire being sucked in. The sunspots are actually break through the event horizon of the black hole of the sun, where you can actually see the collapsing black hole pulling the electromagnetic field in. Well, when I was saying this, I was being ridiculed. Recently, this is what they found.
Often plasma hurricanes were one of the surprises revealed when scientists recently peered beneath the stormy surface of our star. November 7, 2001. Using techniques similar to medical ultrasound, scientists have peered inside the sun and discovered what lies beneath sunspots, planet-sized star carriers on the surface of our star. Astronomers have long known that sunspots are regions where magnetic fields become concentrated. Yet anyone who played with magnets as a child has felt how magnetic fields of like polarities repel each other. Likewise, the strong magnetic fields of sunspots should naturally repel each other too, causing the sunspot to quickly dissipate. Indeed, observations show that surface material clearly flows out of the spot. What then makes sunspots so long-lasting? How do they remain intact for weeks and months? A team of scientists had to look beneath the surface of the sun to find the answer. Alexander Kosovichev and Junwei Zhao of Stanford University, along with Thomas Duvall of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, used MIDI's unique ability to probe the happening just below a sunspot surface, and for the first time, they have clearly observed inward-flowing material. We discovered that the outflowing material is just a surface feature, says Zhao. If you can look a bit deeper, you find material rushing inward, like planet-sized whirlpools or hurricanes. This inflow pulls the magnetic fields together. The cool downward flows dissipate at the same depth where the hot upward flows diverge, explained Duvall. With these data, one cannot get a sharp enough picture to really explain the details. Until now, we've looked down at the top of sunspots like we might look down at the leaves and tree trunks. For the first time, we're able to observe the branches and trunk of the tree that give it structure. The roots of the tree, however, remain a mystery.
That's for you guys. Now, so they started to see now that the sunspot, which some of them are like 14 times the size of the Earth, okay, are huge vortices going towards the middle. And when they talk about material being spit out of the sunspot, do you guys know what material that is? Water. Large amount of water comes out of sunspots on the sun, right beside the fire.
Is that their conclusion?
No, that's measurements. Pardon me?
Is that their conclusion?
That's their measurements of the material that's coming out, mostly water. Well, steam, you know, H2O. Yeah, it's spectroscopy. But then, you know, so then I was thinking about that. I'm like, okay, well, you know, if you were to travel through the universe, and everything in the universe is a singularity, then you could, you know, build a ship that's able to go inside a singularity. That ship would have to have a drive at its center that's a singularity itself. Okay? And you could enter a local singularity, and because you're in singularity, connected to all things, you could come out anywhere you want, anywhere else in the universe. And you could actually follow a linear progression of that travel. Although it would only take seconds for you to go across the galaxy, you would still go through the singularity of the sun, through the singularity of the hub, and then out to another singularity that would be a solar system in some other corners of the galaxy. You could even go from the hub to another galaxy hub and then come out wherever you want there. You guys are following this? Okay. Now, if you think of it this way, then it's like we should be able to see these guys coming in and out. So I started to investigate this, and I found something very bizarre. I found that most of the telescope and probes that observe the sun are owned by no one else but the Vatican. The Vatican. And I was thinking, well, that is strange. What does the Vatican want with the sun? And I noticed, so I started to, kind of keep track of what was going on the sun. And I kept on downloading, material from NASA, from the SOHO probe, which is a probe that's orbiting the sun. And one day, this video was put on the net. This was a while ago, almost 5 years ago now. There's been many others since then. This is a good one. Let's take a look at it. They placed this on the sun. Now this is the probe telemetry. This is the camera. And it has a little arm that has a protective lens because otherwise the electronics would get overwhelmed. And this is the sun surface here. This is a representation of the sun surface. And this is the video. So this video was placed on the net saying comets, sun-gazing comet hits the sun. And a bunch of people downloaded this stuff. And emailed NASA and said, what are these objects? Because comets usually have extremely long tails when they approach an object like the sun. Do you know how big these objects are? At least the size of the Earth. Okay? A comet the size of the Earth orbiting the sun or approaching the sun should have a very large tail, very visible tail. So, after a whole bunch of astrophysicists emailed NASA going, what are these objects you're calling comets? They retracted the video. And I was lucky to get a copy because after, a whole bunch of people complained when they retracted the video, they put the video back on. But all of a sudden, the objects had tails. However, let's go back and analyze this video a little bit. You can see the stars in the background all going from left to right. Okay, that's because the probe is orbiting. Right? And then you can see all these little white dots. Those are particles hitting the camera. Let's try to find one. You see this one? That's a particle from the sun hitting the camera. So you can ignore these little bleeps. But if you actually go backwards, you will find that there is only one object going towards the sun at first. And then at this frame, you will find two little objects here that appear that in the next frame move from here to here. Can everybody see this?
Not the light.
Oh, the light. So, from here to there. Right? Now, that's against all the other movements in the background. Okay? And then on the next frame, these two objects become one. Now, that's quite possible if the two objects ended up one behind each other. Right? So now it becomes one to an observer here. And then the next frame, these two objects become the second comet, which makes a 90-degree angle turn. See? Boom, become one, and then starts moving in this direction. So it came from here, it became one here, and then started moving in a completely 90-degree angle direction from where it was going. Now, the only comets that I know of that do that type of crazy movements are the ones that have little windows and little guys in the back waving. Okay?
The size of the Earth?
The size of the Earth. And here you can tell that the objects make most likely a full orbit of the Sun, and then boom, enters the Sun approximately at 19.47 latitude, probably in the sunspot, and then this huge plasma ejection comes out. Let's take a look at it. Boom. The other thing is the objects don't break into pieces like comets would do. And so I was really amazed to find this video. And I thought, my God, you know, if you were a society that had ships the size of the Earth, you wouldn't be able to go into any small black holes like the Earth. It would be, your ship just would be too big for the Earth. So you'd go for the next fractal level of black holes, you'd go for the Sun. But if you were using a smaller ship and you wanted to go through the black hole of the Earth, then you would find that black hole by going through the sunspots of the Earth. These sunspots would be the volcanoes you find on Earth. And that's when I start to realize as well that volcanoes might not be what we think they are. Meaning that, you know, for instance, the most active volcanoes on Earth are at 19.47 latitude. They're right where I live, on the island on the big island of Hawaii. And we find most volcanoes have a large amount of UFO activity. The volcanoes at 19.47 latitude in Mexico have so much UFO activity that the government, the Mexican government, has started to train pilots so that they know where the UFO activity is and they can avoid these routes when they're approaching Mexico City for landing. It's actually become mandatory that they follow that class if they are landing more than a certain percentage in Mexico City. Why? Because Mexicans typically sit on their porch at night and look at the UFOs coming in and out of volcanoes. That's how much activity there is. So I was thinking, well, if your ship, though, is the size of the Earth, then you'd have to go for the sun. And as I was thinking this, the music was playing in the background, and this was what played. And I thought that was very indicative.
Well, I dreamed I saw the silver spaceship flying in the yellow haze of the sun. There were children crying and colors flying all around the chosen ones. All in a dream, all in a dream. The loading had begun. We were flying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun. Flying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home.
Want to hear it again? Okay.
Beam is up.
Let it play. Crank it up.
Well, I dreamed I saw the silver spaceships flying in the yellow haze of the sun. There were children crying and colors flying all around the chosen ones. All in a dream, all in a dream. The loading had begun. We were flying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun. Flying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home.
Two objections. One at 5 o'clock and the other one about 10 o'clock.
Pardon me? How we could travel through the universe. The wormholes that John Wheeler predicted, I believe, are actually visible. They are vortices on the surface of the sun that we call sunspots. And they're going directly through to singularity. The vortex we found on Jupiter, the big red spot, 19.47 latitude. The big volcanoes we found in our solar system, the largest volcanoes in our solar system, the Olympus volcanoes on Mars, 19.47 latitude. Go ahead.
On this video, do you know the time scale?
Yeah, this is over, I think, a 2-day period. Yeah, I think it's about approximately 2-day period, but I don't have the timer on it. So I was, I was amazed, but you know what? The sun right now is doing some crazy stuff. Have you all been going through some epic challenge in your life? Don't take it personally. There's a lot going on out there that actually makes it almost unbelievable that we're here. Unbelievable. Did you know that last winter a comet almost twice the size of Jupiter flew through our solar system? Yeah, they didn't talk about that one. They released the data at the last minute. Let me pull it out for you, just so you see it. People don't know about this. Unbelievable. They didn't even talk about it on TV.
Why?
Because they thought we were toast. And they thought we were done. A planet, a comet twice the size of Jupiter is not trivial. Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. An object twice the size of that is extremely massive. And there's no doubt that it should have disrupted many of the orbits in our solar system and created huge tidal wave on this planet.
Why did it?
I don't know. Here it is. This is the video that was given by NASA about it. They didn't talk about it, they just put it on the net, on the solar side. And basically, you were looking at, the basic telemetry of the sun. And then all of a sudden, oh, what's that? Okay. This is called a V1 comet. And you can see that this is not a trivial object. Look at the sun flare that goes at it and actually disrupted its path. And this is the size of the sun, you guys. Okay? The sun is enormous. The earth looks like a little bitty dot beside the sun. Right? This is a huge object flying right towards the sun, actually, and went around the sun. Astronomers thought it was going to hit the sun. That's why they thought we were toast. But it looks, and I'm not sure about this, it's extremely difficult to get data on this. They won't talk about it much. But I think that it didn't hit the sun because of the sun flare that actually moved it away. Did you see that?
What's the black stripe?
Oh, that's the arm that holds that little disc so that the lens doesn't get burned. But you can see that sun flare moved that comet away from it.
This is the Vatican that did all this?
Well, the Vatican has a large investment in most of the probes that observe the sun and the dates when it was going to come back. Well, they missed by 2 weeks. And all the people that are looking for Planet X, they're all disappointed because they say Planet X didn't show up. They didn't notice a comet twice the size of Jupiter showed up. The comet was 2 weeks in advance from the Sumerian text, but hey, on a 10,000-year prediction, I think that's pretty dang good. Right?
It's a quarter-inch off.
Yeah, exactly.
Was it observable from?
It was. Yeah, it was observable from the west coast here very early in the morning, at sunrise, I believe.
What month?
February, yeah.
Of 2003?
Yeah, last winter. And here's the map when I updated it, and it showed the comets. And there was 2 comets that went by, one after the other. Now let me play this in slow-mo. This first comet came by, which is already enormous. And then this one. Check this out.
Are they in the same orbital plane?
No. They're on an angle coming in.
Right, so it's not quite as bad as it was.
Yeah. However, the gravitational field of an object that big going inside the Mercury orbit should have pulled Mercury right into the sun. And look at the tail. When it's at the sun, the tail is still in the Earth's orbit.
Well, if you know what the orbit is, you should be able to calculate what
the gravitational influence was.
what the perturbation is to the orbit.
Yeah, we did. We shouldn't be here.
Why are we here? Why are we here?
It didn't snap back. That means it still moved.
Pardon me?
The orbit of the Earth, you know, I mean, if you're saying that it changed the orbit of the Earth, then it's changed.
Oh, it didn't. Because if it did change the orbit of the Earth, it would have changed. The calculation showed that it would have changed it significantly, and a significant change in our orbit would have generated tidal waves and all sorts of events on the surface of the planet that we didn't see. Well, mostly necessarily, yes.
A small change over time would be a big change over time. A small change in a short time.
It wouldn't be a small change. It would be a large change, including Mercury going into the sun behind the comet. You know? You're talking a huge gravitational field here. Extremely large. I believe that we were given another chance.
And we're really not here. We just think we're here.
Well, I think we're floating in grace. We're definitely floating in grace at this point, and somebody is taking care of us. Go ahead.
And with a tail that large, I'm amazed that we didn't get more of a visual on that thing from Earth.
Well, it's because of the angle at which it came in, and the angle of the Earth relative to it. It was not easily available. But there's pictures on the net of it. People took pictures in the morning of the comet. It's enormous.
It occurred that quickly.
Yeah, it was moving extremely fast. It moved extremely fast. Within the question of a few days, it was out of our solar system. Yeah.
The size of a comet, I mean, the mass of the comet isn't basically the size of the comet. Here, extremely large, and yet be extremely small. Well, we see expanded gas. Were they actually able to see the nucleus of the comet?
Yeah, the expanded gas, that's a good point. The expanded gas of that comet is much larger than the sun.
Well, the material size of the coronet would tell whether or not it was really expected.
You see the size of the perturbation and the expansion of the gases around the comet makes the size of the comet actually much larger than twice the size of Jupiter. So when they say twice the size of Jupiter, they're talking about the nuclei of this comet. Because the material around it, this is the size of the sun. The material around it makes it almost as large as the sun.
You're talking about size or mass?
I'm talking about size. The mass is directly related to its composition, which is supposed to be mostly ice and rocks. So,
It should be a concentration of many gas.
well, yeah, but that would be an unusual comet. In general, comets are ice and rocks.
Which would make its mass so close to the sun's mass. The sun is gaseous. The solid object that size would have a mass.
An extremely large mass. And the calculations show with a comet made out of ice and rock of this size, the gravitational field is extraordinary, is enormous. Go ahead.
So you're thinking that this was definitely a comet, this wasn't a starship.
Yeah, this was definitely a comet.
They were protected by other forces, but this wasn't, if this was just a comet, what was it really?
That's right. Because you see on this one, you know, unlike the videos of these other objects, you can tell there's a pretty good tail there, you know. I mean, this is a tail the size of an astronomical unit, almost, from the sun to the Earth, you know. So that's, you know, that's appropriate for a comet, you see. Go ahead.
What's the source of this? Is this this is an animation, obviously, since the Earth is in it, or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a program that gives you the activities that are going on in the solar system.
But it's based on measurements.
Yeah, it's all absolutely accurate to what's going on out there. At least some of the stuff that's released by NASA, in any case.
That's actual footage, right?
That's actual footage, yeah. This is not an animation. This is pictures taken by Soho of this comet going by. Go ahead.
With regards to the, what are your information and thoughts on what the latitude was with regards to the sun, where that came from, and might that affect?
Because that would have created a large perturbation in our daily life. Now, the sun is not, you know, the activity that's going on in our solar system is just outrageous right now. You guys need to know about this. It's kind of nuts. This is what the sun does every year. Every 11 years, I'm sorry. It's called the sun cycle. Every 11 years, the sun flips its poles. Its north pole becomes its south pole, and its south pole becomes its north pole. And when it does that, and I don't mean that it flips its physical poles, it flips its magnetic poles. And when it does that every 11 years, it goes from a smooth surface with not too many sunspots to more and more sunspots, till it reaches its peak and flips its pole, and then it goes back to normal. It goes back to this type of structure. So this was the approach to the last sun cycle, the last solar maximum. Go ahead.
Is the solar maximum concurrent with the minimum magnetic field? Just concurrent to swapping?
No, it's concurrent with the maximum magnetic field. The magnetic field becomes extremely active because of all of the sunspots generate a huge magnetic field and huge X-ray emission as well. Sunspots generate huge X-ray emissions, and that's because material is being sucked inside a black hole, and you expect X-ray emission from that. But as you look at the sun, you find that these sunspots, you know, are supposed to go to a maximum and then go back to normal. So here is the sun in 97. The sunspot maximum was 2000, and then 2001, actually at the end of 2000, the beginning of 2001, and then it's supposed to go back to this. So 97, 98, it's starting to get more active. 99, you can see there's a lot of activity. And then 2000, it reached its maximum, and now it's supposed to be back to normal. Is it? No. This is the sun a few months ago. There's more sunspots on the sun than ever before. Some days they have recorded over 200 sunspots. There's never been so many sunspots on the sun. In fact, since Galileo, we haven't seen anything like it. The sun is not calming down at all. Now, the last sun cycle was 2001, plus 11 years. That gives you the date for the next sun cycle of 2012. the end of the Mayan calendar, which tells us that we are approaching a time where we are going to move into the sixth sun. Right. Now remember the dynamics of the theory we learned about this morning. Black holes generate smaller black holes that are subatomic particles that makes plasma dynamics around it. When it gets too much plasma, it starts slowing down, and then it becomes unstable, and it fluffs off some of that plasma, and then starts spinning up again. I think we're approaching one of that fluff off part. And I think the sun has done this before. There's another thing that the sun started to do. And this data now, I don't have a scanner while I'm on the road, but I found new data recently. The sun has started to pulse these huge electromagnetic pulse emission. And I wasn't sure about this because I thought maybe it's the cameras that are going berserk on the SOHO probe. But it's not. I looked at the data of the amount of negative ions produced by the sun, and the negative ions production is going through the roof right now when these pulses are occurring. It's the negative ion production is at normal on a scale from 1 to 9 when it's at about 2 to 3. And recently it's of the sun all of a sudden just pulsing like this. Let me show you what it looks like on telemetry. See? You gotta know, you gotta go frame by frame, otherwise you can't tell. But if you go frame by frame, can you see that? And then the next pulse. Well, this is days apart. Actually, let me see. See, the camera is taking pictures every few hours. But the thing is that the camera only takes picture every few hours, and if you're lucky, it's going to take the picture of the pulse. But it might have missed a lot of pulse in between. So you don't know, but at least you see some of them there.
How long do you think it lasts?
I don't know. I haven't got enough data to tell, but it's definitely significant. And the amount, and Elizabeth Rauscher and I are actually right now trying to calculate how much energy it would take for the sun to actually do that. Because when you're talking about an object the size of the sun, all of a sudden changing its amount of radiation, almost doubling it in X-ray, just like that, you're talking about a lot of energy.
Is this an accepted phenomenon? Other people see this and they accept this as something happening?
Well, there's definitely a lot of physicists saying there's something happening about the sun. They're not necessarily all aware of this. I've made many of them aware of it, and I've shown them the data. They don't have much to say about it. They don't know what it is. It's definitely not normal, meaning we haven't observed this from the sun before. I have another one that's much more outrageous. You guys want to see it?
Yeah. Why can't we feel it now? I mean, why don't we feel it when we're outside?
Oh, you do?
You can even see it.
Have you noticed this summer? The world has never seen heat like this. All around the world. thousands of people have died in Europe. China had 126 degree heat. You know, this is not the result of global warming. Global warming does not happen that fast. Okay? This is the result of something much more dramatic, like the sun going berserk. And the other thing is that Jupiter, you see, have you heard about Aurora Borealis this year?
Yeah.
You know what Aurora Borealis are, right?
Yeah.
These colors you see in the sky? These colors you see in the sky are the result of the ions thrown out by the sun, the plasma thrown out of the sun, getting caught in the magnetic field of the Earth, and then getting funneled at the north and south pole of the Earth. And when they enter the atmosphere of the Earth, they create all this radiation that looks like Aurora Borealis. Well, that happens on the other planets too. Let me show you Aurora Borealis on Saturn. See? That's Aurora Borealis on Saturn, on the north and south pole. Let me show you Aurora Borealis on Jupiter.
Have you used any?
These are the pictures of the north and south pole of Jupiter.
Is that unusual?
Well, what's unusual, and I don't have a picture, I gotta get it from the net. I gotta get that in my presentation. What's unusual is that on Jupiter right now, there is so much activity from the sun. Well, on the Earth, never mind Jupiter, the Aurora Borealis are now spanning all the way down to the equator. And they've been seeing Aurora Borealis on the border of Mexico and so on. And there is Aurora Borealis in the North Pole that have been going on steady for weeks and months. They're not going away. Because there's so much solar activity, the sun is throwing out so much stuff that there's so much ions coming in the atmosphere that it's creating these Aurora Borealis all around that are, in a steady state now. But on Jupiter, they have now observed an extremely hot spot, almost the size of the Earth, on the North Pole of Jupiter. Because there's so much solar activity, and all these hot ions are going in, the surface of Jupiter is actually starting to ignite. Jupiter is the exact same composition as the Sun. In the sixth sun tradition of the Incas, the Mayans, and many others, many tradition talks about the next evolution, there will be two suns. And from these tradition, what's his name? Arthur C. Clarke did the movie 2010, where Jupiter atmosphere ignite into a sun. It's the birth of a new sun. I thought that's interesting. But I wanted to show you some of these pulses. I have new ones that are kind of mind-boggling. I hope I can find them. It's kind of not obvious because there's so much stuff going on. Let me see. What pulse is that? So these pulse, is typical or what would be expected of a system that's about to go and release some of its energy. Now, it might not Okay, 25, 148. Let me see. 25, 148. Let's see. I can nail this.